We are going to go over the definitions for the different parts of a plot diagram. So first we're going to start at the bottom of this plot diagram. So this plot diagram does kind of follow the pattern of like a roller coaster. But at the very, very bottom, it's flat down here. That's going to be the very beginning of your story. And it's flat because usually the beginning is just your introductions, which is the exposition. So the exposition is the beginning of the story. This is where you introduce your characters, setting, mood and tone, etc. So this is just the very beginning of the story. It's where you get to know your characters, where the story takes place, and you set the mood. Now, as we go up this hill right here, this is called the rising action. And the rising action is all of the events that lead to the climax of the story. This is where you will introduce the main conflict, so the main problem in the story. So the main conflict usually is what causes this upward motion. So it's going to happen down here, and it starts the upward motion because it'll be your character having to deal with the main conflict, so the main problem. Then up here at the top of the hill, and I said at the beginning that this looks very much like a roller coaster. I like to think of the climax as that top of the roller coaster when you're riding it, when you're about to go over the other side. It's the most exciting part of the roller coaster. Oh, excuse me. And the climax should be the most exciting part of the story. So this is the most intense or exciting part of the story. This is when your character should be facing the conflict head on. It is the turning point of the story. So whenever the character is facing whatever the problem is head on, it's also going to be the turning point. So when they start to kind of deal with that problem head on, which leads to this downward motion, which is the falling action. And the falling action is all of the events that lead to the resolution of the story and the conflict. So all loose ends should be tied up. So they're going to begin being tied up during the falling action. So all loose ends should be beginning to tie up, which leads us to the resolution. And the resolution is just going to be the end of the story. The problems or the conflict should be resolved, and all problems, or all loose ends really, should be tied up. The reader should not have any questions if you have properly resolved your conflict. Now, going down to the second page, we do have some other things that we kind of need to fill in. So the setting of the story is where the story takes place. It can be the location, time of day, time of year, or even the time period. So if your story takes place in the future or if it takes place in the past, that is all part of the setting. Now, mood or tone. Mood is the general feeling of the story. So it's going to be the feeling the reader gets when reading the story. Tone is a little bit different, and tone is a little bit more difficult. Tone is the author's feelings towards what is happening in the story. And sometimes it's hard to pick up on tone, but if the author clearly thinks that something is like good or bad, they will change the tone of how they're writing in order to indicate kind of what their feelings are about what is happening or about a situation. Now, characters are all the people in the story. But we have to break that down into protagonist and antagonist. These are the two main characters in a story.
Good morning, Bobcat. Today is Friday, September 17th. Congratulations to all of our
Sorry for the interruption.
This week. Auxiliary cadets have a meeting today after school in Miss Rowan's room.
The protagonist is going to be the main character in the story. This is usually seen as the good guy, but not always. But it is going to be the main character, so who the story is mainly about. The antagonist is going to be the person, group, institution, or thing that goes up against the main character and causes the conflict. So this may be a person. It also might be a group of people. It could also be an institution like the government, or something like that, but it could also just be a thing. So if the main problem is, for example, a natural disaster like a hurricane, then the hurricane is really the antagonist. It's what's causing the problem. The antagonist can also be the protagonist. So if the main problem is an internal problem that the protagonist is having, like maybe they're afraid, and that's what's keeping them from being able to do things, then their fear would be the antagonist. Now, the conflict is the main problem in the story. This is the most important part of the story. Okay, so this is the most important part of the story. Without a conflict, you do not have a story. So it is the most important part. And last but not least, theme is the lesson, still in caps, the lesson learned from the story by either the character and or the reader. Now, this must be a lesson that is broad. And what I mean by that is you do not want it to be very specific to the story itself. You want it to be something that could be applied to anyone's life. So it should be able to be applied to anyone's life. Some examples of different themes might be the importance of friendship, or don't judge a book by its cover, or if you are greedy, then, bad things might happen, right? So these are just life lessons that we can take from the story. And it's going to be based on what the character goes through and usually how they are learning and changing in the story. So that is all that we have. Sorry for any interruptions, but make sure that you do have these copied in